It has been called one of the 100 worst ideas of the 20th century, the single greatest affront to public intelligence, and an abomination. You've heard it in dozens of classic and not-so-classic television shows, from I Love Lucy to The Andy Griffith Show, The Big Bang Theory, and even Seinfeld and MASH, those uproarious guffaws and claps, scandalized oohs and sentimental ahs, so persistent and over the top that the unseen audience must be inhaling a steady stream of nitrous oxide. It is, of course, the laugh track, aka canned laughter, one of the strangest and most reviled devices in all of popular entertainment. But if the laugh track is so universally loathed, how did laugh tracks remain so ubiquitous for so long? Who invented the strange practice, and why has its use all but died out in recent years? Well, prepare to laugh and clap on cue as we dive into the fascinating history of the television laugh track. While the pre-recorded laugh track is a relatively recent development, the use of artificial applause or laughter to shape an audience's reaction far predates the invention of television, dating all the way back to classical times. For example, when 1st century AD Roman Emperor Nero performed on stage, he packed the theater seats with a chorus of 5,000 legionnaires commanded to cheer and sing his praises. In the 16th century, French poet and playwright Jean Derault gave away tickets to performances of his plays in exchange for the recipients clapping or cheering loudly. This practice eventually led to the establishment of organized bodies of professional applauders known as claques, who could be hired to fill out an audience and enhance their reactions. By the early 19th century, claques had become institutions unto themselves, with different categories of clackers available depending on the client's needs. Commissaires would memorize the entire show and point out its best qualities to their neighbors between acts. Rieurs laughed raucously at the jokes. Pleurs cried loudly at sad or dramatic moments. Chateliers or ticklers kept the audience in a good mood, while bisseurs cried "piss piss" or "again again" to request an encore. Claqueurs took advantage of the communal nature of live entertainment, where the audience is an integral part of the overall experience. As anyone who's tried to watch the Rocky Horror Picture Show or The Room can attest, entertainment just hits differently when experienced with others. Fast forward to the 20th century and the invention of radio, which inherited many of its dramatic conventions from the theater, including the use of studio audience to provide authentic reactions and replicate the communal feeling of in-person shows. In the early days of radio, when shows could only be broadcast live, producers were limited to whatever reactions the audience had in the moment. In 1935, however, German inventor Fritz Flümer invented the magnetophone, the first modern reel-to-reel tape recorder. While so-called wire recorders, which recorded sound magnetically on an extremely thin steel wire, had existed for several decades, these were temperamental and prone to distortion. Repairs and editing were also difficult, as two pieces of recording wire could only be joined by tying a knot, which produced a loud hiss or pop as it passed by the playback head. The magnetophone, on the other hand, used paper, later plastic tape, covered in a layer of iron oxide, which not only produced far superior sound quality, but was also much easier to repair or edit by simply gluing two pieces of tape together. Magnetophones were used extensively by Adolf Hitler to broadcast supposedly live speeches across Germany simultaneously. After the war, magnetophone technology was brought to the United States by pioneering sound engineer Jack Mullen, and radio producers and performers across the country immediately recognized its potential. Among the first artists to take advantage of the new technology was crooner Bing Crosby, whose radio show, which ran from 1949 to 1952, was scheduled for the same time slot each week on both the East and West coasts. To avoid having to perform the same show a second time for West Coast audiences, Crosby began pre-recording his broadcasts using magnetophone. This also gave him the flexibility to record multiple takes and edit together the best possible versions of an episode. This process, however, created unexpected problems. For example, sometimes the audience wouldn't react as expected to a particular joke, or their reaction would become more subdued over multiple takes. Editing different segments together sometimes also caused laughter or applause to be cut off at the splice. Crosby and Mullen soon hit upon the idea of inserting pre-recorded audience reactions to fill in the gaps, and the modern laugh track was born. As for where these laughs originally came from, Mullins later explained, "The hillbilly comic Bob Burns was on the show one time and threw a few of his then extremely racy and off-color folksy farm stories into the show. We recorded it live and they all got enormous laughs which just went on, but we couldn't use the jokes." Today, those stories would seem tame by comparison, but things were different in radio then, so scriptwriter Bill Morrow asked us to save the laughs. A couple of weeks later, he had a show that wasn't very funny, and he insisted that we put in the salvaged laughs, and thus the laugh track was born, end quote. This practice was quickly adopted by dozens of other radio shows. Typically, laugh tracks were only used to sweeten or enhance the reactions of live studio audiences by filling awkward silences or covering over editing splices, but in certain cases, shows were recorded without a live audience, and the reactions were simply added in afterwards. When television took off in the post-war era, it in turn inherited many of its practices and conventions from radio, with early shows being recorded on a fixed set in front of a live audience, similar to a theatrical play. Most of those shows used a single camera setup wherein each scene was recorded multiple times from different angles, which would then be edited together to create the final episode. As with pre-recorded radio shows, this created a number of problems when it came to audience reactions. Once again, sometimes the audience wouldn't get a joke and fail to laugh appropriately, or a joke would get stale when repeated over multiple takes. Other times, an audience's laughter or applause would be too loud or too drawn out, drowning out the dialogue or interfering with the pacing. Enter the central figure of our story and the father of the modern television laugh track, Charles Douglas. Born in 1910 in Tonopah, Nevada, Douglas obtained a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of Nevada before moving to Los Angeles to work as a sound mixer for CBS, working on live radio broadcasts. When the US entered the Second World War, Douglas joined the Navy, which, recognizing his skills, sent him for special training at MIT and Bowdoin College. He then joined a research team responsible for the development of the shipborne radar. After the war, he returned to CBS and became its technical director, first for radio and then for television. It was here that he first discovered the persistent problem of inappropriate audience reactions and set about finding a solution. Combing through CBS's extensive recording library, Douglas isolated and mixed together various snippets of laughter and applause in order to create realistic-sounding reactions. Much of this work was carried out in his home in his spare time, much to his wife's annoyance. Quote, "I would go to bed at night, and through the vents I'd hear him editing laughs, the sound effects, applause. It became kind of irritating to me." Initially, Douglas's pre-mixed laughter and applause were used sparingly to fill in awkward pauses or replace reactions that were either too subdued or too loud, a practice known as sweetening. But artists and executives quickly recognized the power of canned laughter to guide and enhance the reactions of audiences watching at home. According to legend, while watching a post-production editing session, comedian Milton Berle once commented, "As long as we are here, this joke didn't get all that we wanted." After Douglas inserted a pre-recorded laugh, Berle allegedly quipped, "See, I told you it was funny." From that point onward, pre-recorded laugh tracks were increasingly used to replace large segments or even the entirety of a live audience's reaction, rather than merely sweetening it. The first American television show to use a laugh track was the 1950 NBC sitcom The Hank McCune Show, followed soon after by ABC's The Pride of the Family. But as the use of the laugh track expanded, new technical problems began to appear. The tracks themselves were laborious to mix and add, due to the primitive recording technology available at the time. The process of adding the laughs to camera footage was just too time-consuming for weekly television. Furthermore, using the same segments of laughter over and over again grew repetitive and artificial sounding. Douglas thus set about developing a machine to streamline the process. In 1953, after 2 years of work, he produced a working prototype, which he dubbed the Laugh Box. Resembling a small piano, the device featured a set of 8 typewriter keys, which, when pressed, played short snippets of various laughs, claps, and other audience reactions, 320 soundbites in total. These sounds were stored on lengths of audio tape wrapped around 32 motorized drums, 10 clips per drum, which rotated past moving magnetic playback heads. This was similar to the operation of the Mellotron, one of the first commercial synthesizers introduced in 1963 and made famous by bands like the Beatles. By playing multiple snippets together, like chords, and varying their duration using a foot pedal, Douglas could spontaneously create realistic-sounding laughs and applause like a musician playing a musical instrument, following along with the on-set action as it was being recorded. A savvy businessman, Douglas kept the inner workings of the laugh box tightly under wraps. All the keys were unlabeled, with only Douglas knowing which ones played which sound clips and what order those clips would play in. He amassed and memorized an enormous library of different reactions, all given amusing labels such as "the guy who gets the joke early," "housewife giggles," and "the one who didn't get the joke but is laughing anyway." There was also a 30-second titter track of low-intensity laughter used to fill out the louder guffaws and belly laughs or fade in different reaction segments. Douglas later added in additional reactions such as oohs and ahs, and whistles for surprising or romantic moments, and even the sound of audience members shifting in their seats, enhancing the illusion of there being an actual audience in the studio or theater. The tape reels and the interior of the mechanism of the laugh box were kept secure by heavy padlocks, and when it came time to swap out the reels, Douglas would disconnect the machine and wheel it into a corner or behind a curtain to prevent people from peering inside. Even the source of Douglas's laugh library remains something of a mystery, though it is generally accepted that at least some reactions came from performances of the French mime Marcel Marceau and pantomime segments from The Red Skelton Show, which, having no dialogue, provided clean, interference-free laughter, perfect for mixing. Thanks to such tactics, Douglas was able to maintain a near monopoly over the laugh track business that he himself had created, proving the Joker's adage that if you're good at something, never do it for free. By 1954, he had amassed enough clients for his services to quit CBS and strike out on his own, naming his company Northridge Electronics after the LA suburb where he and his family lived. CBS tried to claim ownership of the laugh box, arguing that it had been developed on company time. However, Douglas managed to prove the fact that he had invented it on his own time and retained rights to the invention. The laugh box proved an instant hit with television executives who were now freed from the inconvenience of having to assemble live audiences and force them to sit through often long and tedious taping sessions. Soon, Douglas's workload had expanded to the point that he was forced to hire and train additional staff, starting with his son, Robert. This proved a wise decision, for studio executives soon recognized that different laugh men, as they came to be known, were better suited to different material. As Jason Cocker notes, since more than one member of the Douglas family was involved in the editing process, it was natural for one member to react differently to a joke than another. Charlie himself was the most conservative of all, so producers would put in bids for other editors who were more liberal in their choice of laughter. Yet despite his monopoly, Douglas never gouged his clients, charging only what a regular sound engineer would be paid for a similar amount of work. For example, for a 5-hour recording session of the 1953 sitcom The Pride of the Family, he charged only $100, which is around $1,200 today. But not everyone was a fan of the laugh box. A 1954 article in Variety magazine revealed that 2 CBS shows, Life with Father and That's My Boy, had been cancelled because the sponsors did not want to be associated with fake audience laughter. The studio subsequently announced that from then on, all of its productions would be recorded in front of a live studio audience. Veteran British actor David Niven, a producer on the anthology series 4-Star Playhouse, was even more vitriolic in his condemnation of canned laughter, stating in a 1955 interview that, quote, "The laugh track is the greatest single affront to public intelligence I know of, and it will never be foisted on any audience of a show I have some say about. It's just a little like telling a person he doesn't know what to laugh at, taking humbly the hand as though he were a child. I'm not fully aware of the theory behind it, but if my guess is right, the feeling is that people laugh at the sound of laughter. Or if they hear others laughing, they figure that what they're watching must be funny, whether they at home think so or not, so they go along. What utter rubbish. Some people have been kind enough to think of me as a so-so comedian. That's very nice, but if I can't get my laughs on their own merits without some kind of phony stimulus, then I don't want the laughs. Who would?" The first time I heard a laugh track, I assumed there was a live audience, and I found myself a bit stunned because certainly none of the dreary goings-on there on the screen was worth so much as a smirk, not even that smirk of mine. I had only 2 alternate guesses. The studio audience was thoroughly polluted, or else they were tickling one another. All this wild, indiscriminate mirth. Then I learned what it was all about. It was a dreadful lesson. End quote. In 1967, legendary comedian Groucho Marx complained that, quote, "Those phony recorded laughs on television comedies have done more to destroy comedy than anything else. The laugh track has made it too easy for writers. They know that if a joke doesn't go over, it can be covered with a laugh track." Yet despite accusations that laugh tracks were being used to coerce laughs out of unfunny material, according to Douglas's son Robert, this was never his father's intention. Quote, "He always contended that it was for making the show technically better. It was because they couldn't use laughter from the studio because of sound problems, or because the laughter covered up dialogue." Indeed, Robert Douglas blames much of the hate directed toward laugh tracks on the technique's overuse by a handful of television producers, quoting again, "On some of the shows, it was abused. They wanted to keep adding more and more laughs, and it would go way overboard. They thought it was going to be funnier, and it wasn't. A lot of producers would have had the laughter almost louder than the dialogue, and that ruins it. It's a tool. Like music is, like sound effects, like dialogue. It's everything combined together to make a show flow along and have a nice pace to it. It's all timing." With skill and a little luck, a well-executed laugh track can be a work of art, contributing to a larger work of art. We've been around for a long time, and it fills a need in the industry. We don't expect to be the main ingredient in a show, it's just part of the puzzle that puts together the shows that make for great television. But whatever the original intent, there was no stopping the rise of the laugh track. As Robert Douglas explains, all it took was for a couple of shows to be big successes. Then, of course, all the sponsors were totally behind it. At one time, my dad had a list of the top 40 rated shows, and he was doing 20 of them. Indeed, by the 1960s, there was hardly an American primetime television show that Charles Douglas didn't have some hand in. Far more than a simple crutch to cover mediocre comedy, the laugh track actually allowed the medium of television to evolve, freeing producers not only from studio audiences, but from the confines of the studio itself. Scenes could now be filmed outdoors or in other more diverse locations, and many more takes filmed and combined to produce the best possible product. A tedious process no live audience could be expected to sit through. By the 1960s, many shows such as Bewitched and I Dream of Jeannie also began integrating extensive special effects shots which could not be easily filmed in front of a live audience. The watershed moment, though, came in 1965 when CBS prepared to debut its World War II prisoner of war comedy Hogan's Heroes. To gauge the effectiveness of canned laughter, executives showed test audiences one version of the pilot episode with a laugh track and another without. Due to the more cerebral nature of the show's humor, the unsweetened version fell flat, while the version with the laugh track was much better received. As a result, the show was broadcast with a laugh track throughout its entire 6-year run. Other shows also owed much of their early success to the use of a laugh track. For example, the technique was used on the CBS's sitcom The Munsters to tone down the scarier aspects of the concept and maintain a light-hearted comedic tone. As the use of laugh tracks became increasingly ubiquitous, it noticeably altered the way television shows were written and filmed, with writers, producers, and directors adjusting the pace of dialogue and adding frequent pauses to accommodate canned laughter. The same pauses which make episodes of Friends or The Big Bang Theory so incredibly awkward to watch when the laugh track is removed. Charles Douglas's peculiar innovation had completely changed the face of television storytelling. But as ubiquitous as it was, Douglas's process wasn't perfect. With only 320 clips in the Laughbox's library, it was inevitable that certain clips would eventually repeat. Normally, the gap between these repetitions was long enough that regular audiences wouldn't notice, but some laughs, such as a particularly high-pitched woman's shriek one television executive dubbed the Jungle Lady, were so distinctive that they were eventually retired from Douglas's regular rotation. However, some laugh tracks recorded in the 1950s have remained in circulation and appeared on more recent shows like Frasier, meaning that Jim Carrey's comedian Andy Kaufman's rant in the 1999 film Man on the Moon is actually correct. Quote, "I hate sitcoms, George. They're just stupid jokes and canned laughter, and you don't know why it's there, but it's there, and that's dead people laughing. Did you know that? Those people are dead." Douglas's original Laughbox was also prone to various technical glitches, though sometimes this resulted in unintentional comedy gold. For example, during the creation of a laugh track for the 1960s variety show Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which did not use a live studio audience, a key on the Laughbox became stuck, so that instead of full audience applause, the episode's closing credits were accompanied by the sound of a single person clapping. The operator apologized for the blunder, but the producers thought the effect was hysterical and kept it in for the duration of the show's run. Yet, despite these glitches, serendipitous though some of them might have been, Douglas and Northridge Electronics continued to use the same equipment and tapes well into the 1970s, leading to a noticeable degradation in the quality of their laugh tracks as the tapes began to wear out. This complacency eventually led to the emergence of challengers to Douglas's decades-long monopoly, including Sound One, a company founded by Douglas's former protege, Carl Pratt. In 1977, Pratt introduced a more sophisticated laugh track generator based on cassette tapes, which not only offered greater playback quality than Douglas's antiquated reel-to-reel system, but could also generate stereophonic laugh tracks to match advancements in television broadcast technology. In the 1980s, Douglas's son Robert began developing an all-digital version of the Laughbox, but computer processors at the time were not fast enough for the task, so it wasn't until 1990 that he finally unveiled a working machine. Still, the digital Laughbox was even larger than its analog predecessor, containing a whopping 11 hard drives, and it cost $500,000 to develop. Yet these innovations proved too little, too late. For by this time, the heyday of the television laugh track was long over. In the 70s, studios began moving away from single-camera movie-style shows and back towards multi-camera setups filmed in front of live audiences to create a more authentic feel. One of the most famous examples was All in the Family, which was heavily marketed on its live studio audience. The nature of television comedy was also changing, with programs like The Carol Burnett Show and MASH tackling more timely and serious topics. Indeed, series producer Larry Gelbart fought hard for MASH to air without a laugh track, quote, just like the real Korean War. But it was overruled by CBS. Quoting again, I always thought it cheapened the show. The network got their way. They were paying for dinner. Nonetheless, Gelbart was able to negotiate a vital exception. Quote, under no circumstances would we ever have canned laughter during an OR scene. When the doctors were working, it was hard to imagine 300 people were in there laughing at somebody's guts being sewn up. As the series went on and became increasingly dramatic, use of the laugh track was gradually dialed back, but even when it was employed, the wry, ironic humor of MASH meant that Charles Douglas's uproarious, over-the-top laugh tracks created for an earlier, more innocent age of television were now incongruous and inappropriate. Studios thus turned to more subtle, restrained compositions from competitors such as Carol Pratt's Sound One. Indeed, his company dominated the television scene from the late 1970s through the 1990s, providing laugh tracks for shows like Laverne and Shirley, Happy Days, and Newhart. Yet despite the increased subtlety and sophistication of its implementation, the very concept of the laugh track continued to attract critics, with Jeff Reno, a writer for Mork and Mindy and co-creator of Moonlighting, stating, my knee-jerk reaction is that I've never liked them. They're manipulative and are usually way too effusive for what are often really mediocre jokes. Audiences get trained to laugh at the place they know a punchline belongs, whether it's funny or not. Others, however, recognize the utility of the laugh track when properly employed, with Arnold Margolin, creator of comedy anthology series Love American Style, explaining, I discovered if you didn't hit people over the head with it and didn't abuse it, it really helped to enhance a show. People laugh when they hear other people laughing. You just have to show them where those laughs belong. But as television comedy continued to evolve, the laugh track started to become more and more unnecessary. While early television tried to emulate the communal experience of radio, which itself was trying to emulate the communal experience of live theater, the rise of cable, satellite, and online streaming services led to television viewing being understood as more of an individual activity. This period saw the rise of mockumentary-style shows like The Office and Parks and Recreation, which use alternate techniques like one-on-one interview segments to give the audience space to react to the comedy. These developments served to push the laugh track further and further towards the dustbin of television history. Today, even shows that are commonly maligned for their use of a laugh track, such as The Big Bang Theory, are actually filmed in front of live studio audiences, with scenes shot outside the studio later being screened to those same audiences to capture their authentic reactions. And while laugh men continue to work in the industry, nowadays they are largely used for the purpose of sweetening, filling in gaps in the audience's laughter, or toning down reactions which interfere with dialogue and pacing. As Chuck Lorre, creator of The Big Bang Theory and 2.5 Men, has stated, I do not, and never have, sweetened my shows with fake laughs. I've always thought it was a pretty hateful and self-defeating practice. And according to Steve Levitian, creator of Just Shoot Me and Modern Family, quote, when used properly, the laugh guy's job is to smooth out the soundtrack, nothing more. The rise and fall of the laugh track poses an obvious question. Did this much-loathed innovation ever actually work? Can canned laughter actually trick audiences, even modern savvy ones, into enjoying mediocre comedy? And funnily enough, the answer appears to be, well, yeah. In a 2019 study led by Cecil Kig-Chi, researchers at University College London had participants listen to jokes in silence and with pre-recorded laughter and asked them to rate how funny the jokes were. They discovered that the addition of laughter increased how funny the jokes were perceived to be. There is a significant difference between the baseline ratings and the joke and laughter ratings of the neurotypical adults, irrespective of type of laughter. Furthermore, the increase in perceived humorousness was modulated by the kind of laughter. The addition of spontaneous laughs led to jokes being rated as funnier than with the addition of posed laughs. But while laugh tracks can certainly help enhance humor, it is not an all-powerful brainwashing technique. In a 2002 study conducted by neuroscientist William Kelly of Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire, participants had their brains scanned using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, while they watched an episode of Seinfeld. Following each joke, Kelly observed that the participants' left posterior temporal cortex and inferior frontal cortex, areas of the brain associated with resolving ambiguities, immediately lit up. Next, to find out if their reactions were being driven by the laugh track, the same participants were made to watch an episode of The Simpsons, which does not employ a laugh track, as well as an episode of Seinfeld with the laugh track removed. In both cases, researchers observed the exact same neural activity, indicating that the laugh track does not have that great of an impact on what we find funny. But love it or loathe it, it cannot be denied that the laugh track and the technology and artistry that made it possible has had a profound and lasting impact on the medium of television. Indeed, the father of the laugh track, Charles Douglas, was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Emmy by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences for his contributions, while his son Robert has won no fewer than 11 Emmys for adding audience reactions to shows as diverse as Cheers, the Academy Awards, and the Super Bowl. Following a storied career that saw him go from unknown sound engineer to one of the most sought-after men in Hollywood, Charles Douglas passed away in 2003 at the age of 93. Thank you for watching.